Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's me. I'm finally here. Yeah, I kind of fell asleep at the controls today. A hectic morning, but it's a good-looking morning. It's Thursday, September 22nd, 2016. We're on the air. Don't worry about it. I got to scroll back now and see if I missed a morning tweet from Bill. There it is. Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. I don't know. Our computers are running a little slow today, too. They told me it was the wrong time. Let's blame it on them. Daily Co's Radio is live now, said Bill, when I should have been live originally. Kagro X, that's me. I'm late. David Waldman weighs in our way on whether to talk for 2 hours about the news or Star Wars. I choose number 2. I choose it as well. Everyone loves number 2 for some reason. Okay, now that we're going to move on to our 9th birthdays, it would be better. It would be easier, I think, to talk about Star Wars than to talk about all of what's going on, well, everywhere. On the streets, in politics. I mean, I'll avoid it. We'll have to make some time for discussion and see if we can figure out exactly how we can add to things and be a net positive in discussing what's going on. At this point, the flashpoint now, Charlotte, North Carolina, demonstrations elsewhere around the country, of course, because, well, gee whiz, they face exactly the same problems that they face. But once again, we're back here. We seem to be doing the same thing over and over again. And it's interesting, of course, because in the context of the election, it becomes, Republicans point to this and say, I told you, Obama is dividing us. We're being divided by race at a time when we should be united. Of course, I remember when, I remember history. I took it. It was a class. It was really cool. Everyone remembers that. Yeah, not everyone remembers things. So, of course, things are not worse now than they ever have been, as some folks feel inclined to claim, let's say. And I also remember just short-term history that when President Obama, treading very carefully into the first, I guess, what I remember as the first really it wasn't even all that as serious as some of these other things. I mean, nobody died in this case, but the first serious look that we got during this president's administration at tensions which have never gone away in the black community, but were, I guess, still at the time new to many parts of many white communities, when Professor Gates was confronted outside of his own home in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it resulted in the old beer summit, and nobody died in that confrontation, and the president basically warned us, hey, I've got some experience dealing with people, let's say, in the African American community and in their way they relate to the police in their neighborhoods. And there's this rising issue. We had an opportunity with no immediate searing pain of death on our plates to address the issues, and the same people who now scream, oh, it's worse, he made it worse, he's dividing us, divided us. No surprise to anybody, but they took the first opportunity to deal with this in a much better immediate context than death, and said, no, you can't, and you better not, and you're dividing us. And then, gee whiz, I mean, nothing really changed. It's not like they invented the shooting of unarmed black men by police officers right afterwards. We should start doing that because we got away with this thing with Gates. It was, of course, always going on, and we would eventually have had to face it. But I guess that's really the interesting, and I guess that's the kernel of truth in the minds of mostly the deplorables, I would guess, and maybe some crossover just outside of that basket, where I guess people really weren't aware of the fact that went on, and really do view the fact that there's more outspoken opposition and protest against something that's been going on since forever as Obama's fault. Well, after all, under all of those white presidents that came before, you usually didn't see this. Of course, you did. You absolutely did. You saw it all the time. It was just in this hazy memory. And of course, now we have raised a couple of generations taught to believe that, well, among other things, that Martin Luther King was a unicorn and a Republican unicorn at that. And that, when you get the basic treatment of the King philosophy of nonviolence in a civics class, and have no other experience about it or don't study it any deeper or anything like that, because why would you do outside reading? I guess you come away with exactly that. He was a magical unicorn who preached nonviolence, and then, whereas over here, this situation, if not actually violent, looks scary, so that's violence. And so where's the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King, as everyone noticed? Who is this congressman who actually said this? We'll have to look at it on Twitter. But his comment was similar to many I saw. I don't recognize the guy, but he's white. Suffice to say, he's a white Republican from North Carolina. Robert Pittenger. I'm losing track of all these new fools. But yeah, asking where's the spirit of Martin Luther King? And I think it was pretty aptly answered last night, and by Reza Aslan, who said, the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King, where is he? Kneeling on the field at the start of a football game. But, I add, but you're not having any of that either. By the way, that's you got to kick him out of the country. Peaceful protest on exactly the same subject. Unacceptable. Offensive. How dare you? They ought to fire him. They ought to kick him out of the league. Let's burn his jersey. All right. So what kind of message does it send? A large part of the community is probably going to absorb the message. Yeah, peaceful protest, Dr. Martin Luther King, yada, yada, yada. That, while we revere that, you really don't. Maybe you need to get the message some other way. I don't know. Anyway, we'll be talking about it for some time, no doubt, because this, unfortunately, I don't know if I'm the first to announce this. This will continue, and we'll see another one, and it'll come in short order, too. And I guess this portion of white America will, again, throw their hands in the air. I don't understand. Why do they keep jumping in front of the bullets? I guess they're thinking about. Why don't they know good gun training? Why? I would provide that to them for a small fee. Anyway, other things, of course, are happening as well. All of these are bits of context that play on one another, that this will affect the polls. In North Carolina, the white community will freak out again and be upset and scared that they'll be overrun somehow. But, what you would say to people, you can't say, sit down until the election is over. No, that time's long past, too. All right, well, let's gather up some other headlines because, like I said, there's important things happening elsewhere in the world that are going to it's going to cross-pollinate. We might as well take it all in. Greg Dworkin is here to help us do it. Good morning, Greg.
Rate the quality of this call.
The quality of this call so far has been fantastic. They did not dare ask me yesterday. I think there's an algorithm. Oh, and Armando is here, so I want to rate I'll add him in, and then we'll rate the quality of that as well.
Right.
Armando, hi. I've just started with Greg here, so let's...
I thought he had a meeting.
No, tomorrow he's got a meeting.
Oh, I shouldn't have interrupted. I apologize.
Okay. You got a meeting now.
Well, it's no need to apologize.
Yeah, Why not?
I know. What the hell am I doing? I take that back.
Just give me a chance to say something because I can't be wrong till I say it.
Right.
Okay, go
Right.
on. Go
again.
on.
We can do this.
So, David, it's weird. Once the URL moved for the radio website, I'm having trouble finding it on iTunes. So what I do is I put on the Stitcher version on my smartphone, my iPhone, so I can at least hear the intro sometimes. That usually works. But between calling in, I sometimes miss part of it. It sounds like you were talking about the NFL protest knee down.
A little bit of that.
Not just NFL, because it's spreading to high schools and other places.
Yes, it is.
But there was another protest, of course, in North Carolina, and that was, oddly enough, Glenn Reynolds. Got suspended from Twitter yesterday.
Yes.
After he urged motorists to run down some Charlotte protesters. Him being a law professor and all, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on the internet.
Yeah, right. And Donald Trump will pay.
I don't
for
ask
their
people
lawyer.
to run protesters down.
No, it's usually, as Atrios noted, it's chiefly against all the, or was it Atrios? I think actually it was Josh Marshall. It's against all the punditry.
Rick Hassan. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people online pointing out that this wasn't like the smartest move ever.
It was close to the dumbest move ever.
Yes, this was my post, he wrote in an email. It was brief since it was Twitter, but blocking highways is dangerous, and I don't think people should stop for a mob, especially when it's been violent. So, basically, don't kill people. If people weren't killed, perhaps a lot of the stuff that we're seeing wouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
That's the thought.
Don't stop. I wouldn't want to stop for a mob, certainly. Turn around is an option. There's this other thing. I don't know if you look down, usually, in most cars where they put this. The R would be what you're looking for at that point.
You mean reverse?
Yeah.
Or you mean Republican?
Yeah, well, Republicans, yes. They are familiar with R. They can go ahead and do it. The D is actually for drive and Democrat, but and it's also for don't drive into a crowd.
Right. So let's do a couple of things. Let's just give you a quick polling rundown because I think there's some important polls that came out yesterday and this morning.
All right.
That are worth mentioning. Do they change the race? They do not. But the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, very respected media poll, perhaps the best media poll we have out there. Clinton +6 in a four-way matchup. This is one of those situations where when you go to a likely voter model, Clinton actually ticks up a point, which just gives you an idea of how arbitrary the whole likely voter thing is. Mm-hmm. You have other polls like Quinnipiac where if you go to a likely voter model, you cut Clinton's lead in half. And sometimes, like in CNN, ORC, you actually throw it the other way. In this particular poll, though, it's a very solid lead.
ORC, huh?
That's their pollster.
ORC, okay.
Hey, listen, it's better than CNN POS.
That's
which
true,
was Public Opinion Strategies, but, other people have a different opinion of what POS stands for.
Right. I'm a branding guy. And
as a branding guy, maybe not the best choice in the world. I'm just saying.
Okay.
What do I know? I'm not a branding guy. I don't play one on the radio. Anyway, I think that, if you're going to look overall at the picture, you have Colorado and Virginia polls this morning with Clinton looking good. Wisconsin pretty close with a MU law poll yesterday, the gold standard 3-point lead, but it's been a 3-point lead and it's not really budging. And there's another Wisconsin poll out by a pollster not as good who says it's a 7-point lead. So Wisconsin's a hard sell for Trump. New Hampshire's looking good from Monmouth. Florida had a couple of +5 polls in addition to that excellent Siena poll that we talked about from the New York Times the other day when Armando was last on. And in fact, there's a new poll out from the same Upshot Siena combo today on North Carolina, showing it tied. But what's interesting is that Nate Cohen actually tweeted a little chart showing what's a likely voter. Different decisions would change the poll results. So they get 41-41. But if you go by voter history, and that's how you pick your likely voter, that would be Clinton +2. If you do self-reported intentions, like I really am going to vote Trump +1, and if you say I'm almost certain to vote, you get Trump +2. Now, that's the almost certain thing. That's the whole enthusiasm stuff. I've talked about this on the show for a long time. Enthusiasm and momentum both don't exist, but reporters love to write about it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's awful to pick your likely voter based on almost certain. What happens is Republicans get excited early because they're the out party and they're really looking forward to win the White House. So they get excited like a year ago. And Democrats get excited like the last couple of weeks. How do we know this? Because the NBC Wall Street Journal poll that came out yesterday said that now the enthusiasm for the two parties is just about the same. We knew that was going to happen, and that's no shock and no surprise.
All right, then.
Yeah, I actually, my thought on all these polls is Ron Brownstein explained this election 6 months ago. And it's all about the demographics. If you can tell right now, I think I've said this on the show probably 8 million times, but I'll say it again. If you could tell me exactly what percentage of the electorate's going to be white, you could probably predict the exact results within a point or two.
Oh, you definitely could.
All the rest is, at this point, we were waiting to see if the white college-educated number for Clinton was going to hold. It has. We know that Trump's going to run up the score with white no college. There is a question of how high he goes. And the question is, are they going to come out to vote? People forget that Trump's cohort, the white no college, are unreliable voters.
Right. So here's some interesting ideas, and that is that all the states aren't going to go together on this. That is to say, North Carolina is going to have an intense amount of interest for a variety of reasons, including gubernatorial, including HB2, which was the bathroom bill, including what's going on right now in Charlotte. And that may or may not match the intensity of interest in Iowa or Ohio. It might not just match what's going on in North Carolina. I think a lot of states will have trouble matching that. We do have some information from North Carolina. We talked on the show the other day about early voting. And Mike McDonald is providing some really fascinating data here showing that the Democratic vote, at least for accepted ballots and for ballot requests, is up about 30% compared to 2012. And for the Republicans, it's down.
Huh.
And so if you're looking, usually Republicans lead at this point with early voting in North Carolina, and that's not the case. And we don't know lead in terms of what the actual vote is, just which party is requesting ballots and which party is returning ballots.
All right. Well,
so that's all good. Why?
Yes. Because
they're really into it.
Yeah, and I would suggest that you'll probably hear. Well, we won't hear them because we're not there. Although, if news producers are smart, get some camera crews together this Sunday in the African American churches in North Carolina. I would bet there's a big push on in the heat of the moment to get people to do their voting early, to do it now, to lock it in, to express yourself. They tread very carefully when they give these sermons, but there's no doubt about whether or not they're pushing you out the door to vote. And very often it's get on the bus out here now if you've got an in-person place or someplace to go and fill out paperwork for getting an early absentee ballot. There'll be a lot of work going on both there and I guess if they're still, I know they're still working the Moral Mondays angle, but Sunday is a huge day for that. And the fact that North Carolina is, I don't know how we would describe it, but it would certainly at the epicenter of today's round of controversy and tensions. I think you'll see people pushing people toward the ballot this weekend while the iron is hot, let's say.
I'm sending you and Armando a tweet, at least the URL for a tweet, from Dr. Michael Bitzer, also known as Bowtie Politics.
Bowtie Politics, okay.
A small number as of today, but North Carolina's absentee mail-in ballots has really interesting trends so far. And he's looking at it in terms of days before the election, 2012 versus 2016. And it is very typical that in the first 2 or 3 days when hardly anybody throws ballots in there, Republicans and Democrats are tied, but this year Democrats led from the beginning. By this point in time, historically, the Republican absentee ballot accepted number is higher than Democrats. That's what it was in 2012, but not this year. This year, Democrats are over Republicans, and if that trend continues, and we don't know that, that's certainly going to be good news in a very tight race, which is what's predicted by the North Carolina poll from Upshot and Siena. Putting the whole thing together, here's the headline from First Read, which I think is right. Clinton leads Trump ahead of the first debate in terms of what's going on with the NBC Wall Street Journal poll and first read writes. With 47 days to go, Trump needs outside forces to win. There's just no question that it's a competitive race, but that Clinton has a lead. It's a steady lead. It's been true since the beginning of the race. There's just about no time that Trump has actually led, except in the Real Clear Politics version of things, and I frankly would...
That was just after the Republican convention, too.
Correct, and that was only for a moment, and I would stick with the pollster version anyway. I think it's a better algorithm. But whichever one you pick, Clinton has led just about the entire race, and there's no reason to think, unless something happens, that in the last 5 weeks that's radically going to change. People don't change their mind at this late date. They're locked in.
You know what's funny, Greg? You gave this exact same speech about 20,000 times in 2012.
Was I right?
You were right. But here's what's interesting, and we had a big fight about this, and you were part of it yesterday on Twitter. 538 has to have changed something in their model. Mm-hmm. And I'm just saying this not because they're wrong this year. They may be right this year, but they couldn't have been right in terms of the probabilities, both in 2012 and 2016. They never had Obama below 64% in 2012. They've had Clinton as low as 55. Something has changed in their model. And it may be an honest change.
Yes, it's become more sophisticated. It may be actually missing things. Part of it, I think their model includes these so-called fundamentals that would normally predict a Republican win. So, because it's the third term, and so on and so forth, and those are the, Alan Abramowitz type models. Yeah, if you build that into your model, then it's going to be very pessimistic, and you have to fight that in order to get your candidate above where you think they belong.
Well, I think that obviously that's right. A very crude measure. Anyway, Drew Linzer obviously uses the Abramowitz fundamentals as well for the Daily Kos model, and I think that also explains why.
We get Armando back. It's a choice. And it's not a wrong choice, it's a sensible choice, but it doesn't mean it's a correct choice.
Well, I'm just saying, I think that there is a couple of things. You just talked about North Carolina, Greg, and you talked about the performance. Now, it's early. It's 4 days of early voting, right, so far in North Carolina. So you have to play it out. But you may see the first manifestations of what organization will bring. Trump has a historically bad political organization right now. He just didn't put any money into it. For a billionaire, the guy, doesn't have any money.
Yeah, you figure that's 1 or 2 percentage points. It might even be more. But the thing is, polls are never going to pick that up. So if you're making a prediction on polls alone, you kind of almost have to say that at the beginning. A tie, in this case, would go to Clinton because she's got better ground, but the polls can't pick that up.
That's absolutely right, because as I think I mentioned to Dave the other day, there's two components to whether a voter's going to vote. One is the voter, his propensity, etc. But the other side of the equation, and it just doesn't get measured in a poll, is how good is a campaign at getting voters to vote. And there's no poll measure for that. And I actually think that explained the poll misses in 2012. And that I would argue there was a 3-point organization. And by the way, Romney had an organization. Yes. He spent money.
Yeah, the difference between Obama and Romney isn't going to be as great as the difference between Clinton and Trump.
I would think.
So we will see about that. And again, it's going to be interesting. But the overall big picture is that actually the race has been a lot more stable than cable TV would let you want to believe.
And 538. And now, even Daily Kos for that.
But here's the thing. A 64% chance of winning, a 51% chance of winning, a 99% chance of winning, those are all correct if you win. So there's really no way to go back.
So it's a 1% chance under that rubric.
Well, a 1% chance is I was surprised. I thought the other guy was going to win. But there's no way to go back because the election's not tomorrow and say, okay, that was right and that was wrong. And obviously, part of the thing is, are we using these changes in percentages that it was 75 and now it's 64, or in the case of Daily Kos, it was 73, now it's, low 60s. Does that mean there's a trend? does that mean that there was a flurry of polls during the time that she was at a low point? How quickly do the naked eye looks at polls and say, okay, I could already see the trend line changing. How quickly do these models change? In fact, they're built to resist rapid changes so that they don't get fooled by individual outlier polls like Rasmussen. So I don't know how useful they are.
Well, RCP is built to be outlied.
Yes,
I mean, I look at them.
Absolutely.
I have a vendetta against RCP, so I spend a lot of time pointing out the nonsense that they do, which is which polls they include, which polls they don't include. There's no rhyme or reason. To be honest with you, if you did a systematic study of it, you'd say they basically look to lean towards Trump. So I urge people not to look at RCP.
Okay, but you'd find the trend is toward Clinton. She's up 2.1 now, and that's an increase. And why? Because the LA Times poll has actually dropped 4 points in the last 4 days.
Listen, when the LA Times poll is a component of every day of your average.
Which it's not.
It is in theirs. They never drop the LA Times poll. What happens is they drop.
They don't count it every single day. They list the polls that they're using in the average right there.
It's included in their average every day, Greg.
Not yesterday's and then the days before's and then the day before.
No. They don't make it the last 6, but it's always a component of their 6.
It's always a component, correct. But it's
I
not
mean,
like
no other
single
poll
day
is a
7,
component of the RCP average every day.
Say that he's up by 7. That's not what they do. So it's all right, but
I got to interrupt you, Greg. The problem is you cannot include one outlier poll in your average every day. It skews your average.
Well, I don't think you can include one outlier poll in your average every year if it turns out it's not a particularly reliable poll.
No, you're missing the point.
Yeah.
It's not random. If 1/6 of your poll average includes the one Trump outlier poll, but the other 5 are variable, then you don't have an average.
This is the problem that we had with Gallup tracking.
Yes.
And this is the problem we had with when Rasmussen floods the zone with polls, which happened a few years ago when Scott Rasmussen was running the place. So if you flood the zone with lousy polls, your average is going to be crap. And that's one of the reasons why it's very difficult to know exactly what to do with trackers. Interestingly, they don't include every tracker. But again, that's an arbitrary decision. In any case.
Well, wait, no, even that's arbitrary. They include the RAND poll once a week. But there's a RAND tracker. You could include it every day, too.
You're talking about Ipsos Reuters.
Or the Ipsos Reuters, whatever.
Yeah, you can't include it every day because they don't give you the data every day. I know. I go I'm trying to look for it. They only update it about...
Don't they? They have I thought they have an update every day.
No. They actually have a data point for every day, but they don't publish it. They only publish it twice a week. So
What's the data? What do you mean by data point?
Well, if you look at the Reuters Ipsos poll and you go to their website and you see their graph, for every single day there's a data point. You can see what it was on the 11th and on the 10th and on the 9th and on the 8th and on the 7th. But they only published that on the 11th and the previous one was published on the 5th. So you can't follow it every single day. Twice a week when they update it, you can go to the website and see what the data points were up until the time they publish. But it's only published twice a week. So
it's just a mess.
In that sense.
It's just a mess of an average.
And
it makes no sense.
Even worse, their particular poll, they keep changing the URL where they have their latest picture. So if you just save Reuters Ipsos to your, to your menu, and you go there and you click on the poll, you're going to get the same poll they published 2 weeks ago. You have to go find the newest one. It's really hard. They don't make it easy. What they do publish is once a week, they send a little, PowerPoint kind of thing to the media, and that's the one that generally gets included in the in the polling averages, just so people know. So it's a really whacked way of doing things.
It's terrible. It's a lousy poll, by the way. They'll have Clinton 15 and then Trump 20, and it's just absurd.
Anyway, I go back to Pollster. The point I was making is that Pollster, I think, is a much, much better system in terms of how they do it. As it turns out, Pollster has had a 4-point lead for Clinton in the head-to-heads for 2.5 weeks. It hasn't budged. And I think that's really actually the state of the race.
Yeah, I mean, they do a lot of things at Pollster, and some of them make sense, some of them don't to me. But at least there's no just arbitrariness to it. They
announce the arbitrary. They do, but you'd agree with them, okay? They don't include Emerson polls. Why? Because they made a decision this year. You can't include landline-only polls. They're crap. Don't even go there. Half the country doesn't have a landline. So Emerson polls and anything else that's landline-only, not included. Is that true with all the other averages? No. Everybody makes decisions. It just happens. I happen to like the pollster decisions. I would not include Emerson.
No, I don't. I think that's a false equivalence. What pollster does is clear
you keep using that
decided.
I do not think that means what you think it means.
What?
Why is it false equivalence?
Because you're equivalent what HuffPost or the pollster decisions with what RCP does. They're not anyway equivalent. Before they announced,
HuffPost like one set of decisions, and you don't like the other set of decisions.
No, that's just not true.
It is true.
It's not. Look,
the real difference is that the pollster folks are completely.
If we were on CNN, I'd say, "Will you let me finish?"
And if I were Hardball, I'd say, "No." The pollster people are completely and totally transparent about what they're doing. They publish before they make a decision why they're making the decision. You can find it on the site. It's easy. I love them for that. RCP never does that.
And that's where their false equivalence comes in. It's completely arbitrary what they decide to do.
It's different in terms of what they tell you.
No, it's different in what they do 1 week from the other.
But the arbitrariness.
One average from the other day, Greg. If you look at their state poll averages, they'll do the exact opposite of what they do in the national average.
Meaning,
for example, they'll put a Quinnipiac state poll in an average of the same day that they released a Quinnipiac national poll, which they won't include in their national average. It's completely arbitrary. And they'll include a different
Quinnipiac's
poll.
In their national average.
Pardon?
Quinnipiac's in their national
average. It is now, but it wasn't one day, and then they won't include it in the state poll. Listen, they just make it up. That's actually my point. It's completely unexplained and arbitrary.
I get that, and I'm explaining to you that you're wrong. It's not arbitrary.
Okay.
What they are is slow. I have to tell you, this drives me just as nuts as trying to find out what's the latest Reuters poll when they haven't bothered to put it in the same URL. These, a particular site, whether it's 538, whether it's Upshot, whether it's Real Clear Politics, as we get closer and closer to the election and a whole flurry of new polls come in, I'm really impatient with how quickly they update.
Yeah, I know.
Every single one of those is guilty of that. I mean, it's not their fault. They're doing it humanly. Yeah. But, for example, we'll even get a tweet from Natalie Jackson over at pollster saying, we just got like 9 polls. Give us some time to get them into the models here. We have to input them manually. And so you get them in the morning, and why aren't they there by 1 o'clock? Well, they're there by 5 o'clock. Do they change the average? Sometimes they do. And so it's very frustrating when it's not instant. So, we get very impatient. We get very spoiled. Bottom line, the pollster is probably the single best. I like it better than Poll Tracker that TPM uses. I think that's too variable. I don't particularly care for the Real Clear Politics and never have, because I think taking simple averages misses a little bit about what's going on.
They're not taking simple averages, but go ahead.
Their model is close to that. I've spoken.
No, it isn't. But
I've
go
spoken
ahead.
to them, and their model is very close to that, whereas Pollster is a much more complex algorithm. The really complex algorithm is at 538 because they weight the quality of the polls, and they put their thumb on the scale in ways that normal humans can't even begin to comprehend. Wow. So I think too complicated is bad. That's why I like Pollster. It's kind of Goldilocks. It's right in the middle.
All right. Can I talk about something else I think you guys are both interested in?
Sure.
Donald Trump said this morning on Fox and Friends that he wants to do stop and frisk and confiscate guns.
Yeah.
Yes.
How's that not a huge story?
There's only one candidate in this entire race who wants to take your guns, except that's only if you're black, I think.
Yes. Well, that's how it. I don't know. It's just another one of those major stories that isn't a major story, like Sean Hannity keeps doing town halls for him and appearing in his campaign ads and stops around the country for him, and all of this insane promotion for one candidate, and then his network gets rewarded with hosting one of the debates.
Right. So listen, let me make a point before I leave. but it's going to
now
be
you're going to try and
They'll be wrong, but go
yeah,
ahead.
and then you can tell everybody when I'm wrong. But the whole idea here is you got locked-in voters who have already pretty much decided not only how they're going to vote, but how they're going to hear facts. You know,
Yes.
you have cognitive dissonance. You have, the confirmational bias stuff that says if I like a particular candidate, something they said that somebody else would annoy me, but they say it and I can justify it in some way, shape, or form. So what you have is Trump saying outrageous stuff all the time. We get frustrated because it doesn't, quote, seem to be sinking in, end quote. But I would argue, in the much broader sense, all of it sinks in. You look at the polls, pretty much everybody agrees, and when I say everybody, I'm talking about the 30% versus 70%, that Trump's not qualified. And pretty much everybody agrees he's a jerk. And pretty much everybody agrees that the only reason they're voting for him is because they hate Clinton. Now, that may be for good reasons or bad reasons, but what I'm saying is that all the stuff like what David just said about the latest thing Trump said, the foundation stuff, which hasn't been covered as much as the Clinton Foundation, and that's media's fault, nonetheless, it all matters, it all sinks in, and basically, that's why he's losing.
Okay. I mean, it's baked into the loss.
It is. So it's not going to move the needle because everybody already knows he's a jerk. Everybody already knows he's not qualified.
But
everybody already knows that he's
state.
totally going to shoot from the hip, so to speak, in a gun discussion, so to speak. And so does it really change anything? Well, it just reinforces what people already know.
I don't disagree totally, but I do think there's margins. And the one thing that I think you do miss, Greg, is the volume of negative coverage does matter.
Sure,
no matter what
it's
the
enormous.
issue
That's
is.
why this race is closer. That's why people think that Trump is more open than Clinton, or more honest.
Look, if the
That's
media decides
entirely
just to go after Trump for the rest of the way, it's going to hurt him. That's where I disagree with you.
Well, I'd be happy to see that, and it would increase their margins of winning, but it's not going to change the contours of the race in terms of who's going to win.
Okay, I don't. Okay, all right. I can live with that statement.
And in fact, I would be happy if they do, because if she wins bigger, it'll be a whole lot easier for her to govern after, which is part of the deal.
It also helps down ballot. That's
yes.
the reality.
Yes, which will also help get the Senate, which is how you govern. So, I think all of that's important, and I hate to lose sight of it just looking at the stupid thing that Trump said today, because there's going to be another stupid thing that Trump says tomorrow.
I just thought it was an amazing one, because he's been talking about how Hillary hates the Second Amendment,
right.
And the grab your guns. I mean, he explicitly said we're going to do stop and frisk and confiscate guns.
Well,
obviously, he's referring to people of color when he means that. Nonetheless,
but
where's the NRA?
It tells us he believes in nothing. It tells us the NRA doesn't really care. They're about winning, not about policy. We know this. David, do you think this is more important than any other stupid thing that he said?
No, if only because it's. I mean, I guess what I understand your point, which is to say that okay, it's another outrageous thing that by rights his supporters, were it anyone else or were it a Democrat, would say, "Oh my God, gun grabber!" Just like I told you. But in this context, it's wink, wink, nudge. We all know he means black people's guns. We all get no. They don't stop and frisk white people, so we're okay. If stop and frisk or gun grabbing is connected to stop and frisk, I'm cool with that. And you might then go to the black millennial type that the NRA has been featuring in their slick video productions. We got black people over here in the NRA, so it's cool, everybody. And you might ask them what they think. And again, it would be just a lot of justification. Well, he's speaking of in general about criminals, and he's not talking about, say, open carry stops, and he's not saying that it should be done everywhere. It's only in high crime areas, and if you find yourself in a high crime area, that's your own fault anyway, and something. So it's not surprising if he said tomorrow that. None of this has worked. The fact that he says we're going to ban Muslim immigration, etc., and then we say you're selling your Trump Tower penthouses to Arabs all the time. Oh, but the rich ones, they're good guys. They're on our side, But yesterday you said there weren't any.
The birtherism thing, right? So
yeah.
Trump does this for years, and then he says, it's over. Wink, wink. And some, at least, of his followers say, oh, well, it's over because he said it was over. I totally believe that he changed his mind.
Yes. And some say, I believe that he said what the stupid liberal PC media wanted him to say, but thank God I know that in his heart of hearts he's
Well,
still
he
a virgin.
said it last night to a
Yeah.
local reporter. That's exactly what you just said is what he said.
Yeah.
He said, I did it so I could talk about other things.
That's right. I mean, Hillary Clinton also, he did it so that we want to move on with the campaign. Well, Hillary spoke about her servers the same way. Yeah, here's the explanation. Now I'd like to move on with the campaign.
Yeah, that
So
worked really well, right? The media just dropped it after she said it, right?
Yeah.
Well, I reconciled myself long ago to the idea you weren't going to persuade Trump voters. You just have to outvote them.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not even thinking about that. I'm just thinking about particularly the white no college, who is an infrequent voter, whether you dampen enthusiasm. Plus, you get negative stories about how Trump just makes it up.
Yeah.
I would actually hit it hard if I was Clinton today. Just simply, and not so much that he's wrong to be against guns, because I would do, as I've always said, I think I'm the one person in America that actually is for grabbing everybody's gun. I want to abolish the Second Amendment.
But you're a Trump supporter then.
Now I am, yes. Trump won me over.
Who knew?
To stop and frisk and confiscate the guns.
Right. Anyway, those are the big things, big contours of the race. Don't be fooled by individual polls. Certainly, I agree with Armando on this. Look at the RV component if you can. It's your best way to gauge change, and there ain't much change. And there you have it. This is Greg Dworkin speaking with my friends, David Waldman. After all, it's his show. And Armando Lawrence is bringing us insight and wisdom.
He put insight in quotes there.
Bunny quotes, air quotes. And thanks so much for listening. If you're not listening live, you'll be listening by podcast. So however you do it, we don't really care. We're happy. Tomorrow is the day that I have meetings and I won't be on the show. But David will be. It's his show. And even for the rest of the afternoon, I hope Armando's able to stay a little bit more, and we'll see what David has to say. I'll find out when I listen to podcasts myself later on. If you ever figure out the URL for iTunes, let me know. It's a lot easier to follow the show if I can find it.
Jeez, I don't know. All right.
It keeps changing. Take care, and I'll talk
I use
to you.
TuneIn.
Okay, thanks very much, Greg.
Just as a tip, TuneIn is very easy.
Okay, we'll add that to Greg's arsenal at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the podcast, but the live listen, the TuneIn is excellent.
Okay. Yeah, well, we're always expanding our options, which only makes it more and more difficult to get any kind of metrics about how we're doing. But
I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. But more people get to listen in ways that flow right for their machines. I guess we're fine. There's personal preferences, and I guess each of the various devices work best with one or another. So the more options we have, the better, I suppose.
Yeah, when I listen to podcasts, I do Libsyn mostly because I think that's what you guys put on the at Daily Kos, right?
Yes, that's the one although now, let's see, that one I use. The one that goes in the midday open thread is Libsyn. The one that goes on the podcast only post that Scott Anderson does, I use, and in the morning posts when I provide the previous day's show, I'm using the YouTube post. It's a new, and this is thanks to the engineers at Libsyn. They really do a fantastic job there. I love that customizable player that they give us for the midday post, and that's one of their new innovations. But also, they just basically added the option to make YouTube an automatic destination for posting your podcast. There's no video, of course, and we could change that one day. If you all really want to get a good look at what my kitchen looks like and whether or not I shaved today, we could certainly add that, but I'd prefer not to. Anyway, it just puts up our nice little flag guy, Daily Kos Radio logo and the audio, and a lot of people find that, A, easy to find, and B, easy to stream on their phones in ways that some of the other podcasting sources aren't, for whatever reason. YouTube, pretty robust platform, so that's out there too. And we get about 150, 200 people a day seem to want to listen to the podcast that way. In addition to the now 3,000 plus that prefer Libsyn daily. We're growing. It's there.
All right, excellent.
So just thought I'd add that while the world.
No, we always have to do a little promo, always, and I know I've been getting a lot of feedback on Twitter about it, so it's clearly going up in this election cycle. Because I'm not on it. I'm on once or twice a week at the most. And the fact that I'm getting a lot of feedback, you must be getting tons. So
yeah, it's been kind of interesting. And in fact, there goes one right now. Monica CH, who's on Twitter as Mommy CA20. Are you in the California's 20th district by chance, or am I misreading that? Okay. Anyway, she says she's using the TuneIn app to listen to the show. Also works well. Love the discussion this morning with Greg. So that was.
Hey, I love Greg, and he's right about most everything, but sometimes he's wrong.
Okay, he's willing to accept that. You don't know what you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah, I know. Listen, there's an interesting little Alex story, and I thought it might interest you.
Yes.
Enterprise Rent-A-Car dropped out of ALEC.
Okay,
right?
American Legislative Exchange Council, right?
Right, who has been writing legislation, and David has covered it extensively over the years. Anyway, there was obviously a campaign to get Enterprise out of it.
Yes.
It succeeded. Enterprise dropped out of it, and ALEC was complaining about all the people complaining about Enterprise being in ALEC. So apparently they're anti-First Amendment now.
Yes, well, I'm sure they'll write a new piece of draft proposed legislation. States will, and I imagine they actually would do something like this. If they can't, I don't think, find a way to criminalize that, but I wouldn't be surprised if they use the state legislatures to try to find some way of shielding the names of corporate donors to ALEC, or come up with some sort of additional funding mechanism so their corporate funders can hide better.
Yeah, I think that's obviously what they're coming up with. That's definitely what you'll see. Transparency, Justice Kennedy for campaign finance. Well, yeah, watch out. It doesn't work.
Yeah, well, they've had great success with this. The ALEC exposed people, and it's a pretty broad coalition involved in that, and they've had great success in a number of corporate campaigns, as the unions like to call them. You let everybody know what ALEC is, what sorts of laws they what sorts of laws trace their origins to ALEC, and it's pretty obvious. It usually rings a lot of bells for people who read a newspaper. How come they keep this is like the 5th, 6th state I've seen pass one of these stand your ground laws in the last year, or one of these banning teachers from unionizing laws in the last couple of months? And the answer is almost always ALEC or something very nearly related to it. And then you can look it up because there's public disclosure of this stuff. Who's funding these guys? And surprisingly, the answer is very often gigantic public corporations, publicly held corporations that you patronize because you can't help living in the modern world without it, and you realize, hey, my money's going to that. And very often they joined because, we like to use ALEC to lobby state legislatures, and you're not supposed to be doing that, by the way, but we like to use it to try to pressure state legislatures into more favorable laws for our particular business vertical. And, that's at least a semi-legitimate thing to want to do. But the fact is that in their spare time, and actually the bulk of their time is spent on, law and order, supposed law and order initiatives. So for every law you get tweaking the tax rate on car rentals, which is where Enterprise might be interested in something like ALEC, you get 6 or 7 voter ID laws and voter roll purging laws and stand your ground laws. And if you're not interested in the negative backlash that comes from supporting those sorts of things, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, you got lobbyists. You can just do it yourself and lobby for the. We're all going to disagree with you about tax changes, but go ahead and do that. It's like the Charles Evans Foundation giving money to the Trump Foundation to give that cash to the Palm Beach Police Foundation. You want the Palm Beach Police Foundation to have money? Give it to him yourself. Don't involve Donald Trump. He's going to do dumb things with it. He's going to buy a Tim Tebow helmet.
He's going to get a 6-foot tall
Right.
portrait.
of
They
himself.
found it, by the way. Did you see they found it? It's at the Doral Country Club in Miami.
Is it? Okay. I did see that there was one. They had a 6-footer and a 4-footer they were looking for, and one of them turned up in.
The 4-footer turned up, and then yesterday the 6-footer turned up at Doral.
Good. I'd like to see that.
It's the funniest thing you ever saw.
They're all pretty dumb. And you know what's also interesting? I spent a lot of time yesterday. I'll double back on some of the leads I was chasing down yesterday, just in the weird interconnections in Trump world. By the way, his assistant Rona Graff I don't think I've been able to establish any relationship to the Graff Diamonds family that gave him the free engagement ring from Melania. I was wondering about that one. But Rona Graff, it turns out, if you watch The Apprentice, is actually famous from The Apprentice. I've never watched it, so I didn't realize that. But as I was researching it, I noticed the Graff Diamond family. They own a enormous estate somewhere that people tour for some reason. People who still like to tour enormous estates, like we're Pride and Prejudice people. I'd like to tour the grounds as long as the master.
Yeah, let me see your bedroom.
Right, sure.
It's crazy.
But the Graff guy, whose name is I can't even recall now what his name is, but Graff himself, the big man himself, has likewise got one of those ridiculous 6-foot speed painted portraits of himself hanging in it's like everybody buys one of these things at charity. That's, I guess, this guy's gig, Michael Israel. He goes around doing charity events, and the deal is, it's usually either named for some muckety-muck or sponsored by, hosted by some big millionaire, billionaire guy who's got an enormous ego. And
so he's Leroy Demon for rich white guys?
Yeah. So, right, you go to the thing, and part of the show is in half an hour he paints, 6 paintings of various famous people, usually who aren't actually there. And then the last one is a portrait of the richest guy in the room, and everybody knows that, we're going to auction it off now. Who's going to buy this freaking thing? It's going to be him or his wife or one of his kids is going to buy the thing. And they jokingly bid against one another. And if the money's not enough, then at the end, the auctioneer says, now, like they did with Melania, now come on, Mrs. Trump, I think it's a little bit unfair. Who's going to bid against Mrs. Trump for a portrait of Mr. Trump? In all honesty, I think you should double your bid. And they shame them into doubling their bid. And it's all for charity, so it's all good. And voila, you win the thing. And the guy gets a 50% cut for the 40 seconds he spent painting a picture of you. But then some money goes to charity, too. So it's all, that's what this guy, it's not really a scam. He's probably not wealthy from it, but I'm sure he makes a good living. It's just more power to him. He found a way to chisel dollars out of extraordinarily rich people with nothing to do. That's okay with me. It's that's just another little thing about how the way the world actually works, and we all wonder again, one more time, why we get out of bed. It's to listen to this show asking you, why did you get out of bed?
It's funny. Anyway, I'm going to let you go and have the rest of your show to pursue that. I do think this Second Amendment story is interesting when you juxtapose it over the idea that you can't have a background check, but you can have a stop and frisk.
Yes.
It makes no sense. And I guess I disagree with both of you that this could actually, if handled right, and it could have generated some negative stories. Though obviously the birther story is clearer and easier. He basically just said it so people would leave him alone, which implies he's still a birther, which should re-raise all the questions. It sort of defeated his purpose when you say that's why you did it, but.
It could
that's Trump.
You could definitely work the angle. I mean, there were 2 things that he did in the last day or so, both in reaction to the latest shootings. And it's multiple. We got a Charlotte situation and a Tulsa situation, both at once. No surprise. Tulsa not really doing great with the record of shooting the black people. Even their amateur cops shoot and kill black men for no reason. As you may recall, that was the place where the pay-to-play fake cop jumped out of the car and thought he was using his taser, but was in fact using a gun, which why the hell did the volunteer pay-to-play cop even have one on him, and shot the guy to death and said, oops. That's Tulsa. And they got another problem. What do you know? But two things. One, the gun-grabbing comment, and then two, Trump said, yeah, I think the cop in Tulsa choked.
Yeah.
Which was an odd phrasing, but okay, it's a Trumpism. So she choked. She made a huge mistake. She got nervous and scared and lost control of her faculties and shot this guy for no reason. And the video certainly appears to bear that out. There was no, you're even missing the furtive move that they like to point to. I thought he was he's outside of the car, the windows rolled up, he's walking, he's got his hands up, there's a helicopter near, she's got backup, but still shooting. And so, but the police union, which had just endorsed him, is now actually, is actually reacting the way we think some Trump supporters ought to react when he says stuff like this and saying, hey, wait a minute. We're pissed off at you. I don't think they've withdrawn their endorsement, but what do you mean choked? How dare you say that she choked? She felt threatened. There's lots to unpack in that, but at least that's happening. So I suppose there's room for, and again, he's not going to lose his NRA endorsement, but you'll probably see some prominent-ish Second Amendment activists say, well, at least this is really something you need to clear up, because we can't have the president casually endorsing gun grabbing, even if he goes back and changes his mind. This is the sort of thing that you're supposed to know how to deal with by now.
Right, and not say, right. I'm going to confiscate guns, which is what he said.
Yes. On the other hand, the gun manufacturers, you could see him sitting down with the gun manufacturer should come and with be escorted to the meeting by the NRA, because that's the trade group for gun manufacturers, and they should sit down with Steve Bannon, and Steve Bannon will wink at him and say, this is Mr. Trump's way of creating a market, expanding the market for new handguns. They'll be confiscated, and they'll have to go back on the market immediately for a new gun. You should love this. Oh, yeah. Oh, you're right. That's a good point. Besides which, in many states now, when the police confiscate weapons, they used to then destroy them after the cases were done and they were used for the evidence and whatever was necessary for the cases to be prosecuted, and then they would destroy the guns. And state after state, again, an ALEC situation, just to tie it back to that ALEC-type situation, lobbying for new legislation by gun nuts in these states to prohibit the destruction and to require that the guns be auctioned off by the police, so that no guns are harmed in the production of this criminal justice system.
That's insane.
Yeah,
that's insane. Listen, I've got to run.
Sure, I'll let you do that.
But we'll continue to listen and have a good day.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. Take care, Armando. Stay out of trouble. Don't run anybody over. That wasn't your idea or anything. Just, that Glenn Reynolds is out there confusing people, and I just want to make sure everybody knows what to do. Yes, that's true, though. State after state, it's not quite as wildly popular as, say, right-to-work laws or stand-your-ground laws, but lots of activity banning police departments from destroying confiscated weapons and instead forcing them to auction them off, so that not only can you buy a gun cheap, but you can buy a gun that's been proven to work for murder and has a track record. You can buy a mass murderer's gun if there's one available for you. And that won't lead to any weirdos, doing sick things like bidding on a mass shooter's guns or anything like that. Similar vein, by the way, lots of legislation to prohibit police gun buybacks, as they like to call them, where you can bring in a gun, no questions asked, and trade it for, a gift card to Walmart or cash occasionally. Usually they get some corporate sponsor to give gift cards instead. And there's all sorts of tax advantages to that if you want to spend the day talking about that. But then the idea is, at the very least, if the guns are bought off the street, then they're lobbying. This is amazing. First, they want to block such things from happening. I'm not really sure why. because it could just as easily be justified as creating a new market for guns or creating a low-cost aftermarket for these guns. If the police are prohibited from destroying the guns they take in the buybacks, even though that was the original idea of the buybacks, usually you get the crappiest, least dependable guns, and therefore the guns most likely to cause accidental injury, even if not used in a crime. But also they have the propensity to be used in a crime because they're in circulation among people who don't care to spend a great deal of cash on them because they're not hobbyists. They're using the guns just as tools, but very often tools in crime or other shady dealings. You get those things off the street, you destroy them, everybody's better off. I guess they could find a compromise and say, all right, guns you buy back from the public, you can transfer at low cost through auction from people who are likely, we think, statistically to use them in crime to people who are likely, we think, to use them in domestic violence and defending their meth stashes, I guess, which are also crimes, but they're white crimes, so it's okay. I don't know. Or we're going to put it in a hobbyist's collection. Now, why a serious, dedicated Second Amendment supporting gun enthusiast would want to add rusted out revolvers to his collection, I have no idea, but that's besides the point. It doesn't make any goddamn sense. So nothing ever does. All right. Let's see. Let's answer this question. Because this did come up the other day, and I don't know whether this is related. Are you listening on the radio or are just following along on Twitter? Serena Blaze, is it B-L-A-I? Is it I-Z? Yes. Okay, I have to enlarge things. I'm getting so old I couldn't tell. Peace Arena on Twitter, who has the very interesting question. Oh, look at that! I set off Siri again. Wonder what the hell sometimes I can't tell what it is that sets that off. And somebody, just to acknowledge this, did send me a note on how to turn that off, and I didn't do it because it's so entertaining. Anyway, Serena asks, any thoughts on the arms sale to Saudi Arabia? So I know she's a listener. And Rand Paul's attempt to block. Are you aware of Medea Benjamin and her book on Saudi Arabia-U.S. connection? I'm certainly aware of Medea Benjamin. Not aware of the book. And as you know, I don't read books. So we got that going for us. I do. I read books. I get jokes and I read books from time to time. But I'm a terrible book reader. So I'm even worse at book finishing these days. I think Twitter has killed the last of that in me. Any thoughts on it? Not many, except... we did discuss it. We brought it up the other day with Joan, and I was sort of caught by surprise by it and said, this is one of these places where it's possible to stand with Rand, as they like to say. I sometimes wonder, though, whether Rand Paul would continue with a bill like that if he thought it had a serious chance of passing. You know what I mean? I'm not sure I trust Rand Paul on a whole lot. But it was interesting. I did see the roll call from the vote, which was a vote to, I think, actually a vote to table the bill. And it went down about 71 to, I don't know whether it was a full house there, but, a vote just over 70 in favor of tabling and just under 30 against. And it was an interesting mix. It was chiefly Republicans joined by, if not, well, they were joined by a lot of Democrats, obviously, if you're going to get to 70 plus. Chiefly conservative Democrats, but also a sprinkling of less conservative Northeastern Democrats. Chuck Schumer was there for tabling. Bob Menendez, I think, was there for tabling. Actually, the roster of Democrats you would have expected to see voting to table a measure, let's say, taking Israelis to task for their treatment of Palestinians, which is weird because it's odd that the same coalition largely would show up on behalf of Saudi Arabia. But what can I tell you? The Middle East is a mess. Believe me, it's a mess. It's a total disaster. And it really is. And there's no clearing that up. It's not nonsensical to say that the same coalition exists because, of course, well, why do dominionist Christians love the ever-loving crap out of Israel? A couple of reasons. The wacky sort of secret one is, well, we believe that if Israel blows itself up, Jesus will come back. So there's that one. The public face of it is Israel is the claims that they make. The only stable democracy in the region. That's an awful hard claim to make. They vote there, but they voted in Iraq too. And I don't need to tell anybody about that, and I'm among the worst advocates for that argument anyway. You all know what I'm talking about, but it's the same sort of position. It's occupied by the same people. Israel needs to be supported, and it's terrorism, I think, that drives it. And their fight against terrorism, particularly for dominionist, fundamentalist, Christian elected officials, largely Republicans. I don't think there's any fundamentalist, Christian, dominionist Democrats. But anyway, their public argument is they're one of our greatest allies in the fight against terrorism, which is to say that they're constantly fighting against terrorists there because they do terrible things to a significant portion of their population who sometimes resort to terrorism to strike back, or sometimes resort to other things that we're happy to call terrorism because it's violent looking and we were taught that the other guys are the bad guys, and so we say, okay, it's terrorism. Anyway, but similarly, Saudi Arabia, they're one of our greatest allies against terrorism. They only produced the vast majority of the 9/11 hijackers, but again, it's just one of those weird things, like because, I don't know, the royal family and the king, he's not a terrorist. He only has an extensive family of filled with people who secretly fund terrorism. Gosh, it's hard to figure this whole thing out, but the point is that they buy a lot of weapons from us and they sell us a lot of oil, and sometimes they give us intelligence on how to find even some of their own citizens who are living elsewhere that we can bomb from the sky and kill them in our fight against terrorism. And yada yada Yemen. I'm going to yada yada Yemen on this one. It's just one of a million things that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So there's my thoughts on it. It was an interesting coalition. If you get a chance, and I could give you that chance, why don't I look that up and see if I can find. I know I saw it on Twitter, and I don't know what's going to be faster, trying to search for the roll call. I'm going to get roll call's Twitter account on this. On the Saudi Arabia thing. So who sent this out? There was I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it quite this way. Probably not. But I'll just say this. If you get a chance to look at the roll call votes, if I had another guest on, I would use that period to find this thing. But the roll call from yesterday's vote is very interesting, and it's worth looking at the names and where they fall and contemplating why that is. It's just not worth my stopping and excluding so many other stories that are very interesting to do it. How about we say maybe we'll do it offline and come back to it. And so Serena has helpfully sent me a link to what I'm guessing is, there we go. Now I can see by hovering over it, Medea Benjamin's book. What's the name of the book? Just thought I'll throw it out. Kingdom of the Unjust. And the cover is nice and pink, just like Code Pink. Kingdom of the Unjust, Behind the U.S.-Saudi Connection. Another of the stories I never got to, by the way, and is still open somewhere on my phone, actually, something that Armando referred me to, that I don't think I ever even got it. I might have parked it in Pocket, but something that he thought would be of interest to me to discuss on the show, too, from the New York Times, which now, of course, means that it'll be blocked from my view for the rest of the month, I think. Saudis and extremism, both the arsonists and the firefighters. A piece from Scott Shane, published on August 25th, 2016. As you know, we could spend about a year pondering Saudi Arabia, but we won't do it all today. But thanks for bringing that to my attention and giving me something fun to think about on Friday. You never know. We'll see what we can get to then. Let's see. Yes. Other things that require quick attention. Let's see. I'll run down the list quickly. One, in Trump news, the various analyses of the amount of money he continues to pay his own businesses from out of the campaign's coffers. We've already reported on that story. I just wanted to note Politico's analysis of that is that he has so far paid his companies $8.2 million. Now, I guess in business terms, we're not yet at the point where we have to bring up once again Sam Stein's admonition that he's not making money, because net he still hasn't. He did, in fact, forgive those loans to his campaign, on paper anyway, something near $50 million worth. So net he's still down. And paying your companies $8.2 million typically doesn't mean you've put $8.2 million back into your own bank account. That usually, a significant portion of that, perhaps all of it, evaporates into other overhead. But I guess if you're the big boss and run your companies the way Donald Trump runs his companies, I guess it's entirely possible that he may just simply direct the various arms of the Trump organization to funnel those dollars directly back to him in some way, and just structure the transactions such that the money passes through and gets right back into his bank account. Even so, that's $8.2 million versus the $50 million. So he's still down net. You could argue that. On the other hand, because we don't have his taxes, and because, as others have written rather extensively, he's got extensive business ties all around the world, and he's revealing nothing in his taxes. And his taxes, even if we got a hold of them today, might not accurately reflect these things. One of the big issues is, suppose that somewhere along the line, he forgives $50-something million in loans to his campaigns. As far as the FEC is concerned, we now have the paperwork. It's done. There are loans that have been forgiven, and he's, so now we consider him to have been largely self-funding at least his primary campaign. What do we do with that if we were come to discover, let's say, that somewhere along the line Vladimir Putin lets his network of oligarchs know that Donald Trump shouldn't be out of pocket $50 million for doing our work for us and getting him nominated as Republican candidate for president over there in the USA, and that it would be a great idea if we purchased assets from him, either here in Russia or overseas or whatever, or for that matter, but we do it to the tune of $50 million, or for that matter, to $100 million. Let him make a profit on it. Or we just park the equivalent of $100 million in rubles, whatever that might be, in an account here in Moscow, and say, when you next come by to do a development project in Russia, here's a bank account you can draw on, and it's going to stay here in Russia, and the IRS need know nothing about it. Don't bring the cash back with you to the United States, but you can build a $100 million development for free now because the money is already parked here for you, and you don't have to tell anybody anything about it in the United States, and now you're not out of pocket. We'd never know, and we may never know whether we see his taxes or not. That's the danger of a guy like that. You can reimburse him by just parking funds in a foreign bank account and leaving them there. You and I, if they put $100 million in a Swiss bank account for us, there's a little bit of a headache of getting that money back to us in a form that we can use it. You and I want to go to 7-Eleven with it and buy one vingentillion big gulps with the money, I guess. I don't know what we want to do. It doesn't matter. But you and I are different from Donald Trump. He's got things going on in other countries where he can leave the money parked there. If the money is parked in Dubai, he can use it on his Dubai projects. Or for that matter, probably have no difficulty moving it from Dubai to Russia to wherever else he might be working on something. You and I, it's no good to us there. I just thought I would point that one out. Seems worth noting, to say the least. Let's see. Other things of interest today. We're probably not going to get to this one, but the Daily Beast has got a news story, an exclusive story. Marla Maples is apparently done being silent about Donald Trump and decided to go to the Daily Beast with this one. Olivia Nuzzi writing that piece, and that's got to be good, but not necessarily something we'll spend time on today, but it's out there. Other things that are out there and deserve some more discussion. There's a lot of places to go. There's one thing, I guess, I'll jump on right away because it's the sort of thing that's best covered on radio. And then I want to transition to one other subject of great importance. I'll tell you what it is in just a minute. First, I'll deal with this from the Des Moines Register. I saw this tweeted out and sent to David Farenthold today. I think it deserves some of the, like the Kagro in the morning level scrutiny. Some donations to the Trump Foundation count as Trump's money, an aide says. Jason Noble, writing this one for the Des Moines Register, a longtime aide to the Trump family, defended Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump's record of charitable giving on Wednesday, arguing some money given to Trump's foundation by third parties, quote, is his money. That's Farenthold's quite correct claim that he stopped giving money to his own foundation back in 2009, and that since that date, the vast majority of the money that's been in there has been other people's money, and he's violating all sorts of regulations on charitable use of these funds by using the money in ways that, as the term of art goes, inure to his benefit. In other words, if you buy a Tim Tebow helmet, if you buy a portrait of yourself and you display it on your own property, or you don't donate that thing to charity for them to then auction off, if you're using it for yourself, the fact that you paid another charity for that indulgence doesn't absolve you of the self-dealing problem. You're still using money that was given to your foundation with the intention that it be used for charitable purposes and therefore was not taxed. You're using that money to buy yourself doodads for your own enjoyment. Yeah, another charity got paid for your indulgence in that enjoyment, but that's not what was supposed to happen. That's just fee for services at that point, and that's not what was supposed to happen with that money. Anyway, there's a couple problems with this claim. Let's get down to it, though. Lynn Patton, a senior assistant to 3 of Trump's adult children. That's funny. They don't even hire their own assistants. They all share Lynn Patton. She's also the vice president of son Eric Trump's charitable foundation. And again, I want to stop here, pause. One of the really interesting phenomena that I discovered in just briefly reviewing like the Rona Graph stuff yesterday. People who are close to the Trumps inside the Trump organization, executive assistants and the like, that there's a lot of personal interaction with, the Trumps, I think they think they're buying a lot of loyalty from these people, and they are. But these functionaries end up occupying a lot of positions on a lot of interlocking directorates inside the Trump umbrella organization. So that Lynn Patton, senior assistant to the three kids, is also vice president of Eric Trump's charitable foundation. And very often you will find that people like Rona Graff are, she's his executive assistant, and she has a role on The Apprentice, but she's also a board member of, 19 whatever, I'm guessing at the number, different holding companies that are part of, under the umbrella of the Trump organization, so that she's on the board of the limited liability corporation that controls the interests of his Dubai properties, or things like that. The Trump organization doesn't directly own all these things, but there's a Trump Baja LLC to deal with that thing, and a Trump Dubai, and sometimes they have Trump in the name, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're a little bit more esoterically named, but he's got a bazillion little corporate domains out there that all, are handled under the Trump organization umbrella, but each one of them needs a board of directors, and he mixes and matches those people and fills those slots with his kids and Trump organization people and confidants, and then I think a lot of times buddies, who knows how many boards Stewie Rah-Rah is on, things like that. I just find that interesting. You got to fill him with somebody, and those are the people he trusts, so on that level it makes a certain amount of sense. But anyway, the payback is these people are insanely loyal to Donald Trump because he's totally made them. But again, that's not unusual in the world either. Somebody who treats you well, treats you with respect, gives you a lot of responsibility and a lot of money, you're very often loyal to those people. That's why we ask to see their taxes and things like that. Lynn Patton goes on to explain to the Des Moines Register that some donations that are made to the Donald J. Trump Foundation should be recognized as contributions from Trump himself. And this is an argument, because in some cases that money would have been paid to Trump directly. Here's her quote. "A lot of times Mr. Trump will give a speech somewhere, or he'll raise money in some way, and he asks that entity, instead of cutting a personal check to him, cut it to his charity," Patton said. That money is money that would otherwise have been in his personal account, right? So when he cuts a check from his foundation to, let's say, St. Jude, it's his money, she added. No ifs, ands, or ways, usually people say buts, about it. Except, of course, there are several ifs, ands, and buts about it. It's a fun argument. It's very interesting, and it's the kind of thing that's likely to make people who are inclined to believe him, or even people who are skeptical but don't know a great deal about what he's doing, the way he's doing, and what the rules really are, make them say, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? You give a speech. Hillary Clinton gave speeches, right, for honoraria. He gives a speech. I was always wondering, he was complaining so much about those speeches and how much he got paid. How come Mr. Make a Great Deal can't make a deal like that? He's got to take small change on licensing deals. How come he can't get somebody to pay him $400,000 for one speech? He's super famous. He makes a lot of speeches. How come he can't do it? I don't know. Can't seem to close that deal. But if he did, and he does get paid occasionally for doing some of these things, and he said, you know what, instead of paying Donald J. Trump $400,000, why don't you pay Donald J. Trump Foundation $400? After all, that's my charity, and I use it to give money to charity. And people will say, good, money to charity, that's even better, terrific. And they'll say it for a lot of reasons, and that's part of the problem. There's more to the story, and there's more about what she was doing in Iowa, but that's not nearly as interesting, I think, for our purposes, as the analysis. Why is it still problematic? Well, one, think about some of the reasons why a payor would be interested in doing this. One, I would much rather be on the public record as paying a charity, even if it is the Donald J. Trump Foundation, which is highly questionable in its status as a charity. I'd much rather be paying the foundation, which, the vast majority of the population can easily be convinced is a charity, than paying him, because charity. And who wants to be seen handing over $500,000 or thereabouts to a guy who claims to be a billionaire if you had the opportunity to hand it over to a charity, even if it was the billionaire's charity? So, obvious PR advantage there. But, as with everything, and as we've done already with a number of other things along the way today, tax advantages, right? If I pay Donald Trump $400,000 for his speech, what usually happens? One, Donald Trump has $400,000 worth of income, and absent any other complicating factors, now owes income tax on that $400,000. Now, he finds ways to lessen that burden or erase it entirely, or in some cases probably finds ways to convince the federal government that they owe him money for having earned this $400,000. Well, not for having earned it, but as against this $400,000, he certainly owes no tax, and they may in fact owe him money based on other things he's been doing or claiming to have been doing. No particular difference. It's not a taxed transaction when the organization that hired him for the speech pays him, because he's an independent contractor. The taxes are his responsibility. It's not an employer-employee situation. But, on the other hand, additional benefit to the organization that was going to pay him $400,000, you're now making a $400,000 charitable contribution, arguably, and you can itemize that on your organization's taxes and say, whatever it is I owe at the end of the day, when it comes to taxes, or at the end of the year, to the federal government, I say, I'm going to take the $400,000 tax deduction and lessen my tax burden. So yes, I paid the $400,000 Trump demanded, but I also saved some money on my taxes because he allowed me to pay his foundation instead of paying him. Okay, so that's minimal and no additional money at that point in the story to Trump. He doesn't benefit in any additional way from having the money paid to the foundation yet. But the payer benefits because now you've got a gigantic tax deduction coming to you that you didn't have before. Now, if the $400,000 then makes it to the Donald J. Trump Foundation, one, that is $400,000 less taxable income in Donald J. Trump's personal account with the federal government, for one thing. And for another, the way he treats that foundation, there's still $400,000 available for him to play with. And depending on how he decides to play, it is, well, one, it's tax-free, and two, it may still very well inure to his own benefit. If he takes the $400,000 and gives it all away to the American Heart Association, fine, fair enough, I guess. And, the only thing that really happens here is that the organization that paid him for the speech gets a big tax deduction. Trump himself, unless he's completely out of his mind, is not claiming the $400,000 off of his personal income taxes if he gives the money out of the foundation. Though, again, we have not seen those taxes. He may just be that crazy. I can't imagine where you come up with an accountant that would be nuts enough to allow you to go ahead and do that. But I've also seen his doctor, so who knows? Anything could be happening. But assuming that it's not, what if he gives that $400,000 to the American Heart Association in exchange for, say, some fabulous prize or another at a charity auction? Say he bids $400,000 for a giant portrait of himself, or as made the news the other day, although I don't know if I stuck it into Pocket or not, because it's a marginal story compared to all this when you get right down to it. But at some point he donated, or he bid $100 and something thousand at a charity auction to Madonna's charity to win a fabulous high-class luxury trip to Paris that somehow, in the middle of all this, also included dinner with Selma Hayek and her husband, who's also a bazillionaire. And So if you get paid $400,000 for a speech and you say, send it to my foundation, and they say, great, better PR for us, plus a tax deduction, and then you take that money and you spend it essentially, although you're paying a charity, you spend it on a trip to Paris for yourself that includes dinner with Selma Hayek, that's self-dealing. That's money that you're using as though it were yours when in fact it's not supposed to be, even if it was a check that could have gone straight to you. Instead of having it come straight to you and then paying taxes on it and then having it inure to your benefit, you're having it go to a foundation you control single-handedly and not paying taxes on it and then having it inure to your benefit too. In other words, you got paid $400,000 for a speech. If you get paid, you net $300,000 because taxes. If your foundation, which you use as your own pocketbook, gets paid, you net $400,000. And you can then spend that on trinkets for your office, Tim Tebow helmets, trips to Paris, whatever the kids want these days. And that's the chief problem with it. The other problem with this claim, of course, is one we're familiar with here on the show. We're constantly having to talk about the fact that money is fungible. We'll define it again. Basically, once the money gets into one of your accounts, there's really just nothing that helps you differentiate between the money you got because speech and the money you got because Vince McMahon and Linda McMahon are idiots and they gave you $5 million. It's all of a piece. And all that cash is fungible and you can't separate the two out, and it makes it in counting impossible. And it's just an accepted concept in finance and in accounting that there is no such thing as separating out that money from the rest of it, particularly if any of it gets used to inure to your benefit. So that's sort of complicating factor number 2 on that one. And there is a third complicating factor that's very closely related, and that is that actually, I guess we've kind of covered it all, and we combined the two. I'm looking back at my tweet in response to Jason earlier today. The 3 problems: the fungibility, which means you can't separate out what's his and what's the McMahon's. 2, that the money paid to the foundation isn't taxed. And 3, that the foundation money still ends up inuring to his benefit. All 3, I think, important factors that are likely to be very little understood and are basically too long didn't read for the rest of the country. But you've been forced to listen to it on Kagro in the morning, and now you're smarter for it, I think. I like to think that about you. All right. There's a couple more things I definitely want to get to, but this would be a fantastic place to pause and note and marvel at my effectiveness in recruiting free uncompensated labor from Rosalind McGregor. Yeah, I guess it comes down to that, doesn't it? Well, all right. We're on a low budget here, and so goodwill will have to be our compensation for Rosalind McGregor. I mentioned to you yesterday that she's our model for field contributions from listeners. If you're new or new-ish to the show and you're not exactly sure what I was talking about when I said you could just find articles of interest to you locally, nationally, internationally. It doesn't have to be your backyard either. I'm interested in what's happening in Bangladesh. Okay, great. If you can prove that it's interesting to the rest of us, we'll play it. Just pick up your smartphone, take your article, sit down, find a quiet place, read and make comments. And it had been some time, not that there's expectations of regular contributions. That's another one of the benefits to this, by the way. You don't have to do this regularly or on any set schedule. No pressure. Though apparently Rosalind McGregor felt some pressure because she came right back, by the end of the day, had a new Michigan update in my mailbox. 2, in fact, one of which is time sensitive. I have that one queued. And one of which is less time sensitive. We'll save that for another day. So, with that introduction, that was a terrible, terrible segue, but it was a good introduction. And again, if you're thinking of doing something like this, here's a fine example. Rosalind McGregor picked up the smartphone, picked up the newspaper, and gave us this Michigan update.
Good morning, David. I have a treat for your listeners today. Something from Michigan for any listening political junkies and policy wonks that is definitely in the weeds and inside baseball. From the Detroit Free Press comes this news. Days after Flint Mayor Karen Weaver served notice that her city might file a lawsuit against the state of Michigan over the Flint drinking water crisis, the state removed Flint's ability to sue. Though Flint has not been under a state-appointed emergency manager since April of 2015, the state still exerts partial control over the city through a 5-member receivership transition advisory board, whose members are appointed by Governor Rick Snyder. The board moved quickly to change the rules under which Flint is governed so that the city cannot file a lawsuit without first getting approval from the state-appointed board. In other words, Flint cannot sue the state without getting the state to sign off on it first. The controversy began March 24th when Flint filed a notice of intent to sue the state of Michigan in the Court of Claims. At the time, Weaver and other city officials said they had no plans to sue the state, but had to take the action to preserve the city's rights should city leaders later determine a need to sue the state over the lead contamination of Flint's drinking water. Under state court rules, the city had 180 days from the time it became aware of a potential claim to file the notice, or it would lose the right to sue in the future. And March 24th was the 180th day. State officials, who were at the time, were considering $165 million in state aid requests for Flint over the water crisis, on top of about $67 million already approved, were furious about the notice. House Speaker Kevin Cotter and Governor Snyder called on Flint to withdraw the notice. That never happened, but the state quickly and quietly diffused any imminent legal threat using the Receivership Transition Advisory Board that continues to oversee many aspects of Flint city government while the city emerges from emergency management. That was the dry Detroit Free Press telling the facts. I'd like to share Jack Lessenberry's take on the matter. Jack writes, Years ago, I heard a young reporter ask an old editorial writer what the difference was between Republicans and Democrats. The old guy said, Democrats love big government, preferably controlled by and run from Washington. Republicans are in favor of smaller, less intrusive government and local control, he said, and then paused. Except, that is, when they're not. The young reporter asked when that was. Whenever local government does something they don't want it to do, the old cynic said. That was long before the Tea Party or Rick Snyder, but events in recent years have proved him right. Yesterday, I talked about how Michigan towns, cities, and villages have been systematically starved for revenue. They've also increasingly had their powers taken away by Republican legislatures. When disgruntled voters went to the polls 4 years ago and repealed the emergency manager law, Governor Snyder and the legislature immediately passed a new emergency manager law. This time, however, they stuck in a token appropriation to render the law referendum-proof, which means it can no longer be repealed by the people. The beauty of the new law, at least for those who like having Lansing in control, is this. It enables the state to keep control of some cities even after they are officially done with the emergency manager process. Flint hasn't been under emergency manager for a year and a half. Officially, the city is now being run by Mayor Karen Weaver and the city council. Except that is when it's not. From now on, if Flint wants to sue the state, it first has to get approval from state-appointed board. Good luck with that. How long will Flint be under the thumb of the Receivership Transition Board? So far as I can tell, the answer is pretty much forever. So remember, those now running our state are solidly and ideologically in favor of local control, except that is when they're not. So there you have a quick summary of what's going on in Lansing, in Michigan, and our state in general. Thank you so much, David. Back to you.
Thank you, Rosalind, and I think that makes an excellent point. And just to, I'm gonna hammer on that for just a second, but not a surprising development, I guess, although amazingly brazen, right? Taking away the right to sue. I've always been kind of fascinated by that. Another aspect of that weirdness of conservatives who love, of course, small government and local control and of course, the Constitution, which they love so much, and their weird dedication to taking away the ability for what is arguably the ultimate in local control in our system of governance, jury trials. They hate jury trials. They hate what they like to call frivolous lawsuits, unless, of course, they're involved in them. Frivolous lawsuits are lawsuits by people against you. That's basically all there is to it on that one. And so they love to seek to block suits. And this is all very much a part of an overarching conservative, or what a mindset among people who still insist that they are conservative and still like to define conservatism in this now obviously absurd way. The deal here is, Flint can sue the state. That's a danger. Here's what we'll do. We'll legislatively remove the ability of Flint to sue. Where else do we see this? Lots and lots of state preemption laws in Florida. A lot of them have come to my attention anyway through the gun vertical, so to speak, where, for instance, in Florida, the state legislature made it illegal for any political subdivision of the state, municipalities, counties, etc., to pass any law or ordinance that diminishes, in whose view, I don't know, gun rights, the baseline gun rights set out by the state legislature. In other words, if it's centralized control, one-size-fits-all government from Washington, terrible. If it's centralized one-size-fits-all government from Tallahassee, awesome. Or at least so long as Republicans control Tallahassee anyway. And when that, should that go away, well, then who knows what they'll feel about that. But it also comes up in the context of stand your ground. That is to say, not only do they just use legislative means to block other political subdivisions from suing, the older movement has been like under the guise of tort reform, or we're going to get rid of, or limit compensatory damages awards from juries. Here was a way of handing over governance directly to a select group of 12 ordinary citizens who don't have to stand for election or anything, but get to hear in detail arguments from both sides. And when I say in detail, I mean like granular detail. What happened here? And both sides get to present their own story and attack the story of the other and examine witnesses and present evidence, etc. And then it's up to 12 randomly, more or less selected individuals to render a judgment. And constitutional conservatives oppose this vehemently. We cannot allow these 12 people to decide based on detailed evidence presented in some cases over the course of weeks by experts from all over the country to then render a decision. We've got to block that. One size fits all block that from Washington, D.C. That's their actual approach to tort reform. And if they can't do that, then they'll just make it so you can't sue, whether you're Flint wanting to sue the state of Michigan or you are a local town, one of the towns in Florida that says it's ridiculous that you're allowed to set up a gun range in your own backyard when you live in a condo. We can't have that. Oh, no? Well, tough luck. You're not allowed to block that in your city because baseline, the state law says you can. Although now, having shot enough neighbors, they finally realized, yeah, that's pretty dumb. Let's repeal that particular law. But they had to do it from the state level. You couldn't make decisions about what you wanted to do in your region by yourself, in your political subdivision. Likewise, I brought up stand your ground. What's the point of stand your ground besides, encouraging people to shoot one another? The idea here is that it would be an affirmative defense that can stand alongside or even become more important than your basic everyday common law self-defense doctrine. And I mentioned that it's common law by way of letting you know. I mean, for 1,000 years, we've already in our systems we've discovered we've recognized that right. It didn't need any enhancement, but the point of the stand your ground defense is that it's an affirmative defense that can be raised way early in the proceedings and can effectively block the proceedings from even beginning. Self-defense, by contrast, is something, typically speaking, I mean, unless the prosecutors decide that's such a strong self-defense argument that I won't even bother bringing charges. Self-defense is something you have to go to trial and take your chances with. At that point where you present your case and all your facts in granular detail to those 12 citizens, you have to make the case that it was right for you to shoot. Stand your ground is something you can use earlier in your proceedings to prevent it from even going to trial. I don't have to defend myself or explain my self-defense, says the way this law is designed. The idea is not only should you be able to defend yourself with your gun, but because the Second Amendment is so awesome and guns are so much fun, we don't even really think you should have to waste time in court. We don't even think you should have to risk having your fellow citizens decide that you are stupid and acted irresponsibly. Because who knows what could happen if 12 weirdos get the chance to judge you. Don't judge me. So we just let you off the hook. Stand your ground? Okay, check. And the judge can say goodbye. You can walk out of the courtroom right now. I totally see what you're talking about. Go for it. Go home. So what is it with this that's going on that so many states are preempting their political subdivisions here? Michigan is doing it. Florida, we've talked about. Why do they all have the stand your ground laws? Why do they all prohibit smaller political units from exercising and defending their rights as against the one-size-fits-all state government versus the one-size-fits-all federal government? How does it keep happening? Just to connect it to a strand from earlier in the show, ALEC is how it keeps happening. The American Legislative Exchange Council now designs the one-size-fits-all solutions from Washington, D.C., or from wherever they decide to hold their meetings, and pass those solutions around as cheat sheets to state legislators in the various states, and they carry them back to their state capitals and pass them there. Why is that particularly interesting? Not only because there's so much opportunity for weird corruption, etc., but because it's also another part of the hypocrisy. They can still campaign on being constitutional small government conservatives that are against one-size-fits-all top-down government from Washington, D.C., because if you hand out the marching orders from ALEC, which sometimes meets in New Orleans or sometimes meets in wherever, Bar Harbor, wherever. And they love to meet, by the way, ALEC does, in resort locations. So the state legislators who attend, and of course the lobbyists who attend with votes, by the way, they get voting rights in the initial proceedings of the model legislating procedure. But, that makes it a draw. Fine food, maybe a little golf, some nice sunny weather if it's being held in the winter. It's an added bonus. You get to go, and it's an incentive to show up and do these things. But because they're being done, one, privately, and two, in various locations, and not in the Congress of the United States, despite the fact that they end up being cookie-cutter pieces of legislation that are passed often verbatim, and I mean verbatim, very often. When they hand these things out at ALEC, they actually put a blank up at the top where you can put your own name on it so that when you get back to your state legislature, you just fill in the name and drop it in the hopper on the floor, and it looks like you're a really super thorough legislator who really thought things through top to bottom and designed the whole bill by himself. You're a star. You're a rising star in the Republican Party now. Typically Republican Party, but sometimes some conservative Democrats go to these things too. Therefore, nonpartisan. Joe Lieberman might go. Anyway, the idea here is you will not have to change a word. You do not have to be smart. You don't have to know what you're doing. You don't have to know how to write legislation or where to put the whys and wherefores in the whole thing. We do it for you. Put your name on it. You look like a star. And best, in fact, that you don't tinker with it, because then the laws will be uniform from state to state where these things are passed. In other words, top-down, centralized, one-size-fits-all legislation, just not from official Washington. It comes from Washington lobbyists who met with you and said, if we could design federal legislation that would impose this from the top, we would do it this way. But instead, we'd like you to carry it home to your state legislatures and disguise one-size-fits-all the top-down legislation from Washington as homegrown common sense legislation from Tallahassee and Lansing and Trenton and wherever else, whatever other capitals you can remember. Cheyenne. I don't know. It doesn't matter. That's the point. But it's interesting in how clever that really is, taking the same. I mean, you run some risk, of course, of these things being diluted or not passing or being changed in some way. It's certainly more efficient to pass it top-down, centralized from Washington, D.C., and national Republicans do very much the same thing. I mean, they certainly had no qualms about trying to pass their tort reform bills from Washington, despite the fact that it was absolutely 100% upside down from what they said they were for. But it helps to disguise the agenda nationally. And I guess then the tie that we can make to the previous portion of the show here is, just as it really, in most cases, won't make a practical difference to the dedicated Trump voter who's also a dedicated Second Amendment supporter that the guy just said he wants to be a gun grabber, it's not going to make it. It'll excuse it in some way. I don't know. Who cares? Or if they really get stuck and they're really super dedicated deplorables, they just say, I don't. The answer is, you're a Jew. Shut up. They can always resort to that one. Increasingly the case online and elsewhere. But this helps disguise the fact that they're not paying any attention to what are supposed to be their central organizing principles here. So I guess no surprise in that sense. All right. Well, I thought that was a terrific update from Rosalind. By the way, back to that portion of the show. You can do that too. And and by the way, if I can make no connections to the rest of the show with it, congratulations. That should be the challenge. If you can come up with something that's so new and exciting and I can't draw a parallel to any of our other stories, let that be a challenge to you. Maybe if that generates more submissions, I'll take it. But that will be my fun with it. I will try and connect it to one of our overarching themes elsewhere in the show. All right. So let's see. Other fun things that might fit into the few minutes that we've got left. Here's one, a follow-up on the first on-campus gun fail in Texas. You remember I brought that one up the other day, Tarleton State University, where the concealed carrier accidentally fired his weapon in one of the residential halls. Students for Concealed Carry has issued a statement on this one. And I just thought I would read a little bit of it and just sort of react to it before we segue out and into the after show. This from Austin, Texas, Dateline. Students for Concealed Carry say, according to a press release from Tarleton State University and reporting by Claire Z. Cardona of the Dallas Morning News, a Tarleton State University student and licensed to carry LTC holder accidentally discharged a handgun. There are no accidents, remember, they always tell us, but for these purposes, accident exists. Accidentally discharged a handgun in a university residence hall on the evening of Wednesday, September 14th. This incident reportedly resulted in no injuries and only minimal property damage. Hooray. So, Brian Ben Simon, Texas State Director for Students for Concealed Carry, commented, This incident is unfortunate, but in keeping with what we saw in both Colorado and Idaho, each of which experienced a single negligent discharge within 2 or 3 months of their statewide campus carry laws taking effect. That's true. And it's nice of him to acknowledge that. But then, of course, he goes on. For whatever reason, there seems to be a period of adjustment that follows the implementation of these laws. Thankfully, neither Colorado nor Idaho has seen a repeat of these incidents, and the overall track record of campus carry is still very strong. And I suppose you would have to agree. I mean, it's still a high risk, and we'll see what comes of these risks over the long term. But it's true that it's not been a rash, an unstoppable outbreak of accidental discharges. Usually one wakes up the rest of this concealed carry community and they're a little more careful. Therefore, our continuing program of awareness about them contributes greatly to further safety, I would point out. After a combined total of approximately 2,000 semesters of campus carry at almost 200 U.S. college campuses, this is only the 5th resulting accidental discharge, and not one of those incidents has resulted in life-threatening injury to the license holder or serious injury to another person. Okay, and that's all good as far as it goes. Without knowing the exact circumstances of the accidental discharge at Tarleton State, SCC cannot address specific contributing factors. However, there is no question that dorm rooms where licensed residents must occasionally handle their weapons while holstering, unholstering, loading, or unloading them are, as we've said before, and we've talked about the Texas arguments, at increased risk for negligent discharge. The increased danger that accompanies unholstering and handling a firearm is one of the reasons SCC vigorously fought proposals such as placing gun lockers outside of classrooms and requiring license holders to empty the chambers of their guns before stepping onto campus. Because of the increased danger associated with handling an unholstered firearm, licensed holders living in dorm rooms should be diligent to observe the 4 basic rules of firearm safety when handling their guns. And then they, of course, run through them because they need to fill out the rest of this release and make it substantive. I only brought this up. I don't argue with any of the points all that much, but I do bring this up. It is exactly right, as we've discussed on the show, that they did vigorously oppose gun lockers outside of the classrooms and forcing people to clear the chambers of their guns before stepping onto campus because, of course, those things would result in negligent discharges. And it is true that there haven't been a great deal of them and they tend to go away after some time. Fingers crossed, we're not at the end of history just yet, so we'll wait and see. But I just wanted to point this out. You made us grant you the concession of the gun lockers so that there wouldn't be accidents. You made us grant you the concession of chambered rounds so that there wouldn't be accidents. You've gotten everything you've asked for so that there wouldn't be accidents. And there are accidents. I just want you to consider that there is no preventing all of this, and that over time there will be more, and you're renewing the crop of carriers every year as new people enter the class of eligible carriers. We will see. We will see long term how these things come out. And I just want to say, concession after concession after concession, you're still hitting the bang switch, and it's unacceptable. I can't accept that explanation. I don't know why you can. You shouldn't.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, I've done it again. I've indulged myself one more time, and I leave myself without time to promo all the great stories coming up on the after show with Wink and Justice. Right up next, it's Thursday. That means, thank God, it's Joe Vidi. Trust me when I tell you that they've got an enormous and exciting selection to share with you coming up